Verstappen won the Hungarian Grand Prix from 10th on the grid and despite a spin. He passed Charles Leclerc twice, who had earlier looked primed for victory and recovery from his Le Castellet error. Ferrari's strategy mistakes allowed Mercedes to scoop another double podium. My name is Aaron Harper, welcome to the 5 Red Lights F1 podcast. Coming up in this episode, is this Max Verstappen's most impressive victory? Can Leclerc catch Verstappen? Surely the championship fight is over. Could Mercedes win the championship if they had the Ferrari F175? And I'll be giving my thoughts on Sebastian Vettel's retirement from Formula 1. Alright, let's dive into the Grand Prix-Cap for Hungary. What a brilliant race that was actually to complete the first phase of the season. We can't call it the first half because we've had more than half the races. But a very, very enjoyable race, even if Ferrari infuriated us all by throwing away yet another winning position. This was probably Max Verstappen's best victory. From 10th to 1st with a spin and win, as they say. And that's super impressive. And Max admitted himself that he wasn't expecting victory, he was hoping just for a podium. But that car has been fast all season. But it was the strategy that won Max this race, as well as his pace on the track. And the strategy started before the race. I think Red Bull won this race really before the race even started because they sent the drivers to the grid on the hard tyres, planning to start on the hards. But because the drivers Verstappen and Perez couldn't get any temperature in them on those laps to the grid, they switched to the softs. And when you're 10th and 11th, you're out of position in terms of your pace and you've got one of the faster cars. You can do one of two things. That's go hard with the soft tyres and try and use undercut and be really aggressive, or play the long game using the hard tyres. And as soon as they worked out that the hards probably weren't going to be very useful to them, the softs became their only option. Ferrari only found out how bad the soft tyres were when they put them on Leclerc's car midway through the race, although there was warning signs from the Alpines and Kevin Magnussen's Haas before that, but apparently Ferrari were oblivious to it. And Verstappen, he's got inside Ferrari's heads because they were more worried about him than they were about running their own race. And that played into Red Bull's hands because they were able to be super aggressive and just wrong foot Ferrari. And every time Verstappen was asked to undercut, he nailed it straight out of the pits. He was quick, he made up the places. Not only in the pit stops, he made places on the track. He passed both of the Alpines. He undercut his way past Lewis Hamilton at the first stop because Red Bull were in tune with what they wanted to do in strategy. As soon as they came up behind a car that looked like it could potentially hold them back, undercut. So they got past Hamilton and never lost that position. And then once George Russell radioed in saying that his tyres were starting to give up, in came Verstappen, undercutting Sainz and Russell to take the net lead because they ended up scaring Ferrari into pitting Leclerc. Now the question I think we can be asking today is this Max Verstappen's best victory? And there are a couple of other contenders, I think, because I actually titled an episode last year, Max's best win? Question. And that was Texas COTA last year. But you've also got to always remember his very first victory in Spain 2016 after Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton had collided. He held off Kimi Raikkonen in the Ferrari in his first race for Red Bull to win on that day, managing the tyres and doing a 2-stop rather than a 3-stop that Daniel Ricciardo went with on that day. I mean, leave a comment and let me know whether you think this is Max's best win or whether you think there was a better one. But I would have to say this is probably his best because he's spun, he's had to make up the ground, he's had to recover, and before in his career we've seen Max find himself down the order for no fault of his own, or sometimes for fault of his own. And he's sort of seen the red rag, hasn't he? He's been like a bull enraged, and it's shown in his driving. But this race victory correlates with the more mature and slightly more at ease Verstappen that we're seeing. There's definitely not the same pressure on him, obviously, as being a world champion. He's achieved that goal now, but the championship fight isn't close, and Ferrari just keep handing Red Bull open goals, and they just keep scoring because they're a well-oiled machine in terms of winning races and winning championships. This is Verstappen's best win because he managed his race superbly, and he was given a strategy to execute, and he did it in the same fashion that we've seen Lewis Hamilton do so many times with Mercedes. The sort of thing we saw Michael Schumacher execute with Ferrari back in the day. Sort of drive Ayrton Senna could have pulled off. Alain Prost. It's up there with the very great drivers and great champions in the terms of this is a victory that didn't look likely, and yet they went and snatched it from somebody else, or they made that other driver team drop the ball. And of course, it wasn't all Max, it was the strategy. And they did a brilliant job at Red Bull. And again, they have scooped up where Ferrari have made a complete mess. So let's dive into that mess at Ferrari. So for Ferrari fans, it's kind of like that meme, isn't it? It's, here we go again. Mattia Binotto said the car had no pace, and I feel that papers over cracks, and we could all see that Ferrari got it awfully wrong with Charles Leclerc. Leclerc drove fantastically in the first half of the race, and then he was left with nothing to fight with. And it was bizarre because we'd seen the Alpine cars go onto the hard tyres and really struggle. And if you think back to Friday, Mercedes went on the hard tyre and it didn't work, even with the hot temperatures on Friday. Fast forward to Sunday and the track temperature, air temperature is much lower. So of course the hard tyre is not going to work. And Leclerc I don't think he'd even done 20 laps on that set of mediums. And yet Lewis Hamilton was able to make his mediums go almost 30 laps. Yes, Lewis Hamilton is very good at conserving the tyres, and that Mercedes car looks after the tyres very well. But I haven't seen anything from Charles Leclerc that tells me he is fundamentally very aggressive on his tyres. I've seen that sometimes from Max, but with Charles, he was getting into his groove, and he even said after the race he wanted to continue the stint. He had good pace, and on the medium, the Ferrari was absolutely flying. Sainz wasn't quite as quick, but Leclerc was absolutely on it. And he would have won the race had they got the strategy right. And the right strategy was to use 2 sets of mediums and 1 set of softs, in whichever order. And I think had Ferrari even come out behind Verstappen on the soft tyres, Leclerc would have had the pace. By the time they put the soft tyres on, I don't think Leclerc's heart was in it. That's why he didn't really recover back up any positions. And I think Sainz was left with too many laps to do on the soft, so he was sort of babysitting them. Both the drivers, I think, were undermined by poor strategical decisions from Ferrari. They were reactive to Red Bull rather than running their own race. Mattia Binotto even admitted live on the Sky F1 broadcast that they were just covering off Verstappen with the first stop. And that was the first warning sign, looking back at it now. They were too worried about Verstappen, and Red Bull tried to scare them with the undercar, and it absolutely worked. Ferrari fell for it, hook, line and sinker, and they got punished in the most brutal and embarrassing way. It's just another in a series of errors within the team, whether it's the team getting the strategy wrong, whether it's the engine exploding and the penalties that have come from it. And now we've got another strategical error which just tops the lot, really. It just sums up the first half of the season. Ferrari have had the fastest car, but They just haven't been able to operate it effectively often enough. I gave a question at the start in the intro. Would Mercedes be winning this championship if they had the Ferrari package? And I think they would be. I think they absolutely would be, because look at what they've achieved, even with a car that half the time doesn't work because it's too busy being buckaroo, and it's still not perfect. It's still not as quick as the Ferrari or the Red Bull, but it's getting there. But fundamentally, Mercedes have been operationally very sound on the pit wall. Yeah, there's less pressure and you've got everything to gain, almost nothing to lose, but this is the 8-time consecutive world champions who seem to have made a mistake with their car design. It's a little bit embarrassing for them. They're getting shown up a little bit and they don't like to lose. They're winners. They're used to winning. They're used to being at the front. And we saw how the demeanour of Toto Wolff was different at the start of this season. And over the last few races, he looked a bit more like himself. Well, the Toto Wolff that we've come to know and recognise over the last 8 years. Mercedes have capitalised on the errors and failures of Red Bull and Ferrari to boost their own total of points. And they are currently 30 points behind Ferrari, who you can argue have the fastest car. 30 points. If you'd said after Imola, where Mercedes really struggled, that they would reach the summer break just 30 points behind Ferrari, who at the time led both championships comfortably, you'd have been laughed out of the room. But I think Mercedes, if they had the Ferrari package, they'd be winning this championship. They'd be ahead of Red Bull because they'd be able to operate it properly. Now, you can argue whether you'd need Hamilton and Russell or Sainz and Leclerc to drive it, but I don't think that matters. I think you give them any combination of those 4 drivers with the Mercedes team, and they're ahead. They have an atmosphere and a culture within the team, even when things are tough, that shines through. They don't blame one single person. They don't just try and pretend everything is okay, which is what Mattia Binotto seems to be doing. They own their flaws, publicly at least, which is what Toto Wolff has done, and he empowers staff to make key choices. He blames the problem rather than the people, and he says we must all work together to fix this. There's none of that seemingly from Mattia Binotto. It's just, oh yeah, we did the best we can today, but clearly you didn't, because you didn't win the race when you were leading it comfortably. Speaking honestly, George Russell should not have been in the lead as long as he was. Ferrari should have gone past him. And yet, they were too worried about Max Verstappen. They were looking over their shoulder rather than concentrating on winning the race. If they'd run their own race, they'd have probably ended up winning it, or at least on the podium, with one or both drivers. The fact that they've allowed Mercedes to get double podiums in the last 2 races shows you the disorganisation, the lack of clarity and the indecision in Ferrari's decision making. And that's where Mercedes are shining through. They're making good decisions and they empower their staff. They work collectively. There's no pressure in terms of, oh, someone's going to lose their job. But you know, with Ferrari, as soon as they make these errors, it's finger pointing. It's who's going to lose their job first, who's going to be the next one out the door. There's talk of Mattia Binotto losing his job, and I don't think that's correct. I don't think we should be asking for anyone to lose their job, because if you were in that position, you wouldn't appreciate it. Remember, these are only humans after all, and that is also another crux of the matter. They're only human, but the humans at Ferrari seem to be making a lot more mistakes than the humans at the other teams. Now, before I dive into the driver ratings, just going to take a few moments to talk about Sebastian Vettel, who announced his retirement at the end of 2022 ahead of the Hungarian Grand Prix. We're going to be saying goodbye to one of the recent greats. He has won 4 World Championships, 53 Grand Prix, and that, no matter how you look at the last few years of his career, that shouldn't be mocked or held in any less regard than it deserves to be. Sebastian was the class of the field for a period of regulation. And that's normal. That happens all the time. The cream always rises. And if you have the fastest driver and car combination, you should achieve what Sebastian achieved. And Seb's breakthrough was spectacular. He won that first race in Monza in 2008 for Toro Rosso, then went on to challenge for the World Championship the year after with Red Bull in 2009, before going on an unprecedented run of 4 straight doubles, which only Ferrari and Mercedes have bettered. How do I rank Seb's accomplishments in the grand scheme of things? I think he's definitely in and around the top 10 drivers F1 has ever seen. But what we have seen is that he needs a very particular type of car for him to access his maximum potential. And we saw this with Jenson Button. On his day, unbeatable. But if the car was a little bit outside the working window, it was a bit more of a struggle. And we've seen that with Seb once he moved away from Red Bull, and well, especially after the turbo hybrid era began and Renault got their power unit so horribly wrong. But Sebastian has achieved brilliant things. He stands for so much more than just a racing driver nowadays. And maybe it is the right time for him to go, because we've seen his flaws exposed now, and it doesn't seem to be coming back. Whether that's Aston Martin or Seb or a little bit of both, not quite sure. But I think it is the right time for him to go. He clearly isn't enjoying racing as much as he used to. And I think that is a big thing. If you don't enjoy something as much as you used to, you should question whether you should continue doing it. And I think Seb has, well, he's admitted he's got a lot of other projects and things that he's passionate about and wants to make a difference for. So absolutely, go and be whatever you want to be, Seb. Go and be the father to your children. Go and be the activist. Go and be the spokesperson. Do whatever you like. But I'm sure we will see Sebastian Vettel back in the F1 paddock. He'll probably pop up somewhere on the TV, even though he says he doesn't want to be a pundit, but I think he'd actually be a really good one. And it's a career well had, a really excellent career. 35 nowadays is a bit young to retire, but congratulations on a wonderful career, Sebastian. Alright then, let's get some driver ratings on the board, and we'll kick things off with Red Bull, of course, who are topping the Constructors' Championship. Max Verstappen started 10th, finished 1st. Only rating I can give him is a 5. He was absolutely brilliant, bar the spin, which he said about a clutch slip issue. At the time, I just thought it was driver error. Probably a little bit of both then. He probably got a little bit too excited trying to pull the gap to Leclerc, and just didn't quite manage that clutch slip issue quite correctly. But he probably would have been on the front row and challenging for the victory anyway without the power unit problem in qualifying. An excellent display, as I've already spoken about earlier. Sergio Perez, his teammate, started 11th and finished 5th. I'm going to rate Sergio as a 2.5 because that's a decent recovery, but also, where has the pace gone for Checo? It's just evaporated instantly. The car has developed away from him, and he's running into the same problems that he had last year, where the car is too pointy, too much on the nose, which Verstappen can handle and exploit perfectly, but it is hamstringing Sergio Perez. But for Mercedes being out of the picture really, and Ferrari endlessly tripping over themselves, that could cost the Red Bull team the Constructors' Championship. It won't, because Verstappen is doing the damage and Perez is doing enough of a job already, and Ferrari keep shooting themselves in the foot. But if things were a bit closer, that's something to be concerned about. Ferrari then, and Charles Leclerc, who started a disappointing third and then finished an even more disappointing sixth. But I'm going to rate Charles as a 4. I thought he was excellent, but his team was not. And Carlos Sainz started second. He should have been on pole position, really, but he finished 4th in the end. I'm going to rate Carlos as a 3. It was a neat and tidy drive. Probably should have been at least one position higher on the grid. Should have finished on the podium. Yeah, but I think, again, like I said, the Ferrari strategy just undermined both their drivers and compromised them terribly. Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton started 7th and he finished 2nd. A brilliant performance from Lewis. I'm going to rate him as a 4. The DRS issue held him back in qualifying and he thinks the front row was there. And based on what George Russell was able to do, which was start on pole position and finish the race 3rd, maybe without that DRS issue, Lewis would have won the race. I know that's a bold claim, and it would have taken some effort to stop Verstappen. But maybe if Lewis had started on pole, he would have won the race. But as for George, I'm going to rate him as a 3.5 because his race pace wasn't quite as good as I hoped it might be, but he drove beautifully. He defended really well against Leclerc. He forced Charles to make a really brave overtake. And he was hard, but he was fair. There was no moving or wiggling around in braking zones. There was no forcing another driver off the track. Super respectful, but everyone who was trying to battle him knew that George was there and not to be messed with, because he wasn't going to. Why should he make it easy? He's going for his first win. He's not got a championship to think about. Leclerc couldn't absolutely afford a collision with Russell. As it was, his team did the damage for him. But Mercedes can be really pleased with their weekend. They don't have the second fastest car, but they came away with the second most amount of points. So for the second weekend in a row. So harking back to what I was saying earlier, Mercedes are operating what they have really well, and they're getting maybe more than the sum of its parts out of it. Let's move to Alpine and Esteban Ocon. He started 5th, finished the race in 9th. I'm going to rate him as a 2.5. He said, I don't think we quite maximised our potential during the race, and that much was evident, but they'd boxed themselves in with only one set of medium tyres, so they had to go onto the hards, and the hards just simply didn't work. Fernando Alonso started 6th, finished 8th, and I rate him as a 2.5 as well. He said, we didn't have 2 medium compounds to choose from for the race. Instead, we maximised our tyre choice for Saturday's qualifying. Our pace yesterday made us feel quite optimistic, and we were anticipating a better result. Yeah, 8th and 9th, not great for Alpine, considering Lando Norris finished ahead of them. And also, today we've been hit with the bombshell that Fernando Alonso is joining Aston Martin. So while I'm here, that is completely out of the blue. Did not expect that. There was talk of maybe, because he hadn't signed a deal with Alpine yet, and obviously his contract was up. But did anyone seriously think Alonso was going to jump ship from Alpine? I was listening to the Race F1 podcast, and they were, it was Mark Hughes and Scott Mitchell who were saying there's obviously the chance that it could happen, but basically saying it was pretty unlikely. And yet here we are less than 12 hours later, and Fernando Alonso will be wearing green next season. Maybe he just wants to wear every colour of the rainbow before he finishes. So who knows? But that was quite the shock at 9 o'clock this morning. That woke me up for certain. Let's move to Lando Norris and McLaren. Lando started an excellent 4th on the grid. He would have been my star of qualifying had George Russell not put the Mercedes on pole position. And Lando managed his race nicely to finish 7th. He said, happy with that. After yesterday, of course, we'd have all wished for a bit more, but we just didn't have the pace today with quicker cars behind. And I think that was the natural position for the McLaren this weekend. Daniel Ricciardo started 9th but finished 16th. Struggled on the hard tyres. For Lando Norris, I rate him as a 3, by the way. And Daniel Ricciardo, I rate as a 2. He was another victim of using the hard tyres, which coincided with his collision with Lance Stroll, and that relegated him to P16. Valtteri Bottas for Alfa Romeo started 8th and failed to finish, the only DNF of the race. We were just a handful of laps away from a perfect finishing race, but Bottas's power unit gave up the ghost. He said it was tricky again today, a bit like France, as the hard tyres didn't build up as fast as I was hoping. We thought it was going to be the best chance for us, but ultimately it wasn't. His teammate Zhou Guanyu started 12th and finished 13th in a solid outing for Zhou. So both Alfa Romeo drivers get a rating of 2. The Chinese driver said, I think our plan today didn't really pay off. No, unfortunately it didn't. But there wasn't many point scoring positions up for grabs. So if you look at it in terms of the finishing order of the midfield, he's middle of the midfield, which is very, very respectable. Kevin Magnussen for Haas, he started 13th, finished 16th. I rate him as a 2. Our race was compromised massively by having to pit for the black and orange flag. Yep, Kevin got the meatball flag, and that wrecked his race. The only option they had was to put the hard tyres on, and they found out that they didn't work. So his race was kind of screwed from there. Mick Schumacher started 15th and finished 14th, so also rating a 2. A lot of these guys in the midfield didn't get a lot of TV time, so we don't really know too much about what happened to them. So I'm just sort of giving an average rating, really. Mick said it was tougher than what we expected it to be. We hoped the C2 compound would work, and it didn't. So in terms of tyre strategy, maybe we gambled on the wrong tyres. Let's go to AlphaTauri. Pierre Gasly started from the pit lane after changing power unit elements without the FIA delegate being present or notified, but he finished 12th. He's decent, I still rate him as a 2 because I didn't really see anything that happened to him. He said, I'm happy with today. Starting from the pit lane is never easy, and we managed to recover from 12th to 12th position. But he should never have started from the pit lane. He should have been starting around 13th, 14th anyway, because he did get into Q2, but then had his lap time deleted, which meant he was relegated back to 19th in qualifying. Yuki Tsunoda also out in Q1, but that was purely on merit. He qualified 16th and finished 19th. He had a spin. Difficult day, he said. Didn't feel like I had much of a race. I struggled with the car throughout. I had absolutely no grip at all. Going to rate Yuki's performance as a 1.5. He's had a real drop-off in performance level for me over the last few races, and he just needs to pick himself back up again. Because he did have the edge on Gasly, but Pierre has retaken the stranglehold within the AlphaTauri team. Sebastian Vettel, he started 18th and finished 10th. So I'm going to rate Seb as a 3. He said it was a fun race with lots of fights and overtakes. He was allowed to go past Lance Stroll this week, and he made the difference. He picked up that final points scoring position. Lance Stroll started 14th, finished 11th. 2.5 for him is his rating. I think I drove a strong race today, and I think Lance did a solid job. And there's been a lot of criticism for Lance on social media, but people just need to get grip. They need to give their heads a wobble and realise that, it's not just because his dad owns the team that he's there. Yes, the funding very much helps him keep that seat, and the fact that his dad owns the team probably means he's safe come what may. But he is a very capable racing driver. He could do a much better. He does a much better job than you or I could probably do in that Aston Martin. So just lay off him a little bit. Open your eyes and have a look at what he can actually do. And let's round things up with Williams. Alex Albon started and finished in 17th place. Rate him as a 2. He said the race was okay. We were a bit out of sequence with the early damage, and there was a lot of tyre degradation and pit stops, which didn't make it easy. It's been a tricky weekend for us. And Nicholas Latifi, who actually topped FP3 incredibly. And then he set the fastest first sector in Q1, and then a mistake in the final corner meant he qualified last. So, bump back down to earth for Nick Latifi. He actually started 19th because Gasly went to the pit lane, finished 18th. I rate him as a 2 as well. He said, unfortunately, our race was compromised at the start through some front wing damage. So they are the driver ratings for Hungary. Look out on my Instagram and Twitter for the average ratings being released later on this week, I actually put in a new sort of, I say ranking system, but just sort of like a colour coding. So we have a purple zone, a green zone, and a yellow zone for each. Well, for the ratings, just to see who's really doing well, who's doing okay, and who needs to improve. And they all match up with the colours that you'll see on the timing screens on the TV. And if you look at the timing screens on like the actual times, same thing. Okay, let's rate the race. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I thought there was lots of action to enjoy around a track known for being tough to pass on. Cars were able to follow pretty well through Sector 2 and overtakes were much more possible than in previous years. There were lots of strategies at play, which always plays into an exciting race, and the track and air temperatures varied over the weekend too, which made setting up the car much more difficult actually. So you had to sort of gamble on what you think was going to happen, and whether it played out in your favour was found out on Sunday, and it seemed that Ferrari maybe got that wrong. So I put the question of rating the race to the guys and girls at F1 Grid Talk. They had their say as well. So Ruby Price and Tom Downey gave the race a 7, bordering on an 8. Tom Horrocks, Owen Medford, George Howson, Louis Edwards and James Rees gave the race 7 out of 10, although Carl King and Jared Partridge only gave it a 5. And finally, before we wrap up, let's have a look at my predictions. I went for Charles Leclerc on pole position, but George Russell got pole position, which can't deny I was actually delighted about. I was very, very excited about that. That was absolutely out of the blue, and well worth my prediction not coming true. I had my podium of Leclerc, Sainz and Hamilton. Safe to say that didn't come true. My bold prediction was a Ferrari front row lockout and a Ferrari 1-2 finish and Norris top 5 at George Russell's expense. None of those came true. So I actually got no predictions correct this weekend. Yeah, good thing I didn't put any money on that. Although, be gamble aware and bet responsibly if you do. And so the checker flag is now waving on this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can check out more from me at f1chronicle.com and insidef2.com, where I contribute race articles to their race weekends. There's now the summer break for F1, so a few weeks off until the Belgian Grand Prix, but there will still be some action on the track in terms of the Formula E finale in Seoul and 2 rounds of IndyCar, which I'll be tuning into. But of course, there will be plenty more of motorsport elsewhere for you to find if they are not your thing. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find links to those down below in the description. And if you like this episode, please rate it on Apple or Spotify. I'll give anyone a shout out who rates it. And if you subscribe on YouTube, I'll also give you a shout out on there from there as well. But you have to let your subscriptions be visible, otherwise I don't know who you are. The number just goes up or down, and I don't know who it was, unfortunately. Any of those would be fantastically helpful, and as I said, I'll give you a shout out if you rate or subscribe. Remember to be kind, enjoy the racing, enjoy the summer break, everybody, and I'll see you when the 5 red lights go out.